In September of 1994, the Office of Naval Intelligence supplied a Soviet-made 30mm six-barreled AK630 Gatling gun system to Martin Marietta Armament Systems in Burlington, Vermont, for test firing and evaluation. The gun system was originally used on a Soviet-built ship called the Hiddensee, a Tarantul-class combatant. The ship and the gun were made available after the fall of the Soviet Union. The weapon was tested with 30mm high-explosive incendiary, or HEI, rounds. The AK-630 was removed from the hiddensee and shipped to Martin Marietta's Ethan Allen firing range in Jericho, Vermont. Martin Marietta modified an EX-83 goalkeeper test stand to simulate the AK-630's shipboard configuration. The AK-630 has a 2,000-round ready service ammunition supply, but for evaluation purposes, only a single 1,000-round ammunition storage container was utilized. The Ethan Allen high-explosive test site was set up and instrumented to fire 30mm HEI ammunition through the AK-630 gun. The AK-630 gun was instrumented to measure system dispersions, projectile velocity, rate of fire, firing voltage, time to steady state rate of fire, and muzzle flash. 2 sky screens were set up to determine the velocity of the projectiles. An AILER acoustic target was placed just beyond the sky screens to monitor individual barrel and burst dispersions and mean point of impact shift. A bullet smasher ensured the destruction of the HEI ammunition in order to meet range safety requirements. Martin Marietta developed a simple fire control unit for the AK-630 gun. The control unit operated the drive solenoid, the feeder solenoid, the booster solenoid, gun fire volts, and gun gas inhibitors. Barrel coolant was controlled manually using an external range water supply. During the test firing, 612 rounds were expended in 18 bursts, ranging from 1 to 199 rounds. Performance of the AK-630 was based on projectile velocity, target dispersion, rate of fire, ammunition action time, and performance of various system control functions. All firing tests were performed with the mount mechanically restrained and the turret servos deactivated. The average rate of fire was 4,800 shots per minute. The rounds to steady state rate of fire varied between 7 and 8 rounds. The rate of fire at first shot was 2,200 shots per minute. The steady state rate of fire varied to plus or minus 300 shots per minute during the bursts. The variations were erratic and lasted for 25 rounds or more when they occurred. Overall burst and individual dispersions were measured. The burst 80% diameter dispersion ranged from 9.2 to 12.2 milliradians for bursts of 24 rounds or more. The average 80% burst dispersion was 10.3 milliradians. Shifts in the mean point of impact during test bursts were not significant contributors to system dispersion, since the gun turret was mechanically locked down. The individual barrel dispersion values ranged from 4.4 to 11.4 milliradians. The downrange velocities measured at 69 feet from the muzzle varied between 2,991 feet per second to 2,902 feet per second. The average velocity was 2,960 feet per second. The average corrected muzzle velocity was 3,063 feet per second. The action time, which is the amount of time from the application of fire volts at the primer to the projectile's exit at the muzzle, averaged 4.3 milliseconds with little variation. During the AK-630 testing, a fuse function test was attempted. Projectile impacts on 3/4 inch thick and 1.5 inch thick plywood at a range of 115 feet did not cause the HEI ammunition fuse to function. A second fuse function test was attempted at 176 feet and 188 feet. Plates of 1/8 inch aluminum and 1/4 inch aluminum were added to the 1.5 inch thick plywood in order to initiate fuse function. No fuse functions were recorded, indicating that the fuses were not armed at this distance. To correct misfires attributed to insufficient firing voltage and current, the 20-gauge wire that connects the control unit to the system fire volts cable was replaced with 12-gauge wire, and the voltage was increased to 40 volts DC current, limited to 30 amps. This modification was successful, limiting the misfires to approximately 1%. The following summarizes the testing of the AK630 gun system. A total of 612 rounds of 30mm HEI ammunition was fired. The longest burst fired was 199 rounds. The lockdown average 80% system dispersion was 10.3 milliradians, 2.6 milliradians standard deviation. The average computed muzzle velocity based upon deceleration of 1.5 feet per second per foot was 3,063 feet per second with a 0.93 foot per second standard deviation. The ammunition action time was 4.3 milliseconds, and the AK630 also exhibited a large muzzle flash 8 feet in diameter during firing. Additional tests of the AK630 are planned, which will investigate longer burst lengths, attempt to determine fuse function at longer ranges, and other AK630 cannons will be tested for statistical comparison.